Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. Alan is also joining this panel because his expertise in fractional art ownership and in the art market, I think, just dovetails perfectly into this panel. So today we're going to talk about investing in collectibles and art. And I have two gentlemen here from Heritage. I've got Todd Imhof, who is one on the far left here, who is one of the owners of Heritage Auctions and the executive vice president. His background and expertise is in coins, rare coins, and precious metals. And he also assists consignment directors in some of the largest, more complex consignments and private transactions across multiple collecting categories. Also, Ed Beardsley. He is vice president and managing director of Fine and Decorative Arts Department, which covers actually 15 different subcategories, including silver, art glass, American and urban art, among others. He's been actively involved in expanding Heritage's presence in New York, Beverly Hills, Hong Kong, and also oversees the trust and estates and appraisal services. So for many of you who do not know, Heritage is based here in Dallas. It is the third largest auction house in the world. It is the largest auction house in the United States. It was established in 1976. They employ over 600 people. They have offices throughout the entire world. They also have over 130 experts in over 40 different fields of art and collectibles. So to have them here today is such a treat. So with that introduction, talk about me. I'm Andrea Perez. I'm a partner here at Carrington Coleman, and I chair the art law department. My specialty is in art law. I also teach at SMU in courses regarding art and international law as well. And I'm your moderator today. All right, so we've introduced Heritage and Todd and Ed, but I would like to know kind of what you saw with collecting in 2020, 2021. What happened in the pandemic?
This on? Good. All right. So again, my name is Todd Imhof, Heritage Auctions. I should correct one thing that Andrea mentioned. We're the third largest auction house, or third largest auction house in the world. We're the largest auction house founded in the United States, not the largest auction house in the United States. A couple of little known companies called Sotheby's and Christie's are still larger than us, and they're very much embedded here in the United States, although they're French owned, not US. So to Andrea's question about what we saw in art and collectibles, especially during the pandemic period, if I'm being completely candid, my partners and I sat around a boardroom table and looking at each other, wondering if anybody had a blueprint for what was happening when this pandemic started. We had no idea the impact that it was going to have on our marketplaces. And frankly, it wasn't, we looked at it as a negative. We did not think this was in any way going to benefit many companies at all, especially ours. We were wrong. The amount of money that flowed in during that pandemic period and the amount of time that collectors and investors were suddenly spending on hobbies and other interests that they were having, not to mention looking for diversified ways of investing. What Alan was talking about earlier created a boom, created a major boom in collecting fields, really across the board. Heritage is involved in over 40 different collecting categories, and we saw dramatic increases in all of those. Heritage benefited more than a lot of other companies because we had invested millions of dollars and tons of time in developing online platforms and developing a website that made it very easy for collectors and connoisseurs to investigate the items that they were interested in and eventually bid or sell via online. So that gave us, in a way, we had been preparing for a pandemic for many years before it happened. Obviously not looking at predicting that, but we are certainly in a good position, and we benefited from the investments that we had made prior to that.
We can get one more slide. That shows the 40 categories. It's actually about 45 categories. I'm going to go through these slides quickly. We'll stall on a few so that we can talk it through. I do want to expand on the fact that when the pandemic started, we were extremely worried about where our revenue would go. And it is true that the online setup that we had, it was flawless. And I felt badly because I work with a lot of cultural institutions and museums and performing arts companies and places that couldn't entertain. And I did a talk with the Business Council for the Arts here in Dallas. And Heritage, almost immediately, sales started increasing. And other people were suffering out there in the art world. But we saw an immediate increase in online engagement. Think of it this way. People are at home, they're bored, they're looking for something to do, they're all online. What's more fun than an auction house that represents over 40 categories? You're looking at fun objects you could own, and people spend a lot of time, and we'll talk more about what it means to, what an auction house is all about. But let's talk a little bit about the global art market. And there's a little typo in this slide. Alan might notice it, or if you were paying attention to Alan's billion is correct. The art and antiques sales estimated at 65 billion in 2021. It is a huge industry. Public auction sales increased by 47%. This is from 20 to 21. This data comes from the UBS and Art Basel report. It's accessible to anybody. If you're interested, your best bet is to educate yourself about the arts, open up these reports, read about what's going on. But imagine a 47% increase in auction business. People are getting more comfortable with auctions as a model for buying art. There are galleries, there are dealers, there's other private venues. But because auctions have taken their reputation so seriously, everything is vetted, everything is authenticated. In Alan's presentation, he was talking about you put down provenance, you put down exhibition history. All of that's very important. We were offered a Jackson Pollock the other day, and it had 0 exhibition history. And it happens probably 5 times a year, right, Alan? And the fact of the matter is, if it's too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true. And be careful out there, educate yourselves. We as advisors to the collectors are open to questions, discussions, but count on the information that you can find online. I'm sort of drifting, but let's see, what else do we have down here? 40%, 43% of worldwide sales by value in the US market, very strong. The online market continued to expand, accounting for 20% of worldwide sales. I will tell you, Heritage, we can go on to the next slide. 63% of our sales have been online sales, huge percentage. So a couple slides. Again, from the Art Basel and UBS report, sales in the global art market, they did dip in 2020, not surprising. There's a lot of uncertainty, but they quickly bounced back in 2021, and I anticipate the numbers being even higher in 2022. Next slide. Online sales, huge increase in online sales. Make sure you're working with reputable house, Heritage, Bonhams, Christie, Sotheby's. I mean, there are a lot out there. It's important that you trust in the companies you're bidding with. Next slide. Talk a little bit about the auction market. Public auction sales of fine decorative arts reached an estimated 26 billion. Again, we said that's 47% increase. Private sales increased. This again is a global report. I will say probably over 50% of the private sales are through Christie's and Sotheby's. We are in a steady growth as we have been for 30 years at Heritage. Each year, we will increase our private sales, and our eyes and ears are open to opportunities like those presented by Alan. And of course, post-war and contemporary art is probably the strongest collectible category for the fine art department. I will say that you know, the Francis Bacon's and the big paintings itself are 20 million, 30, 40, 50, 60 million. Everybody hears about it. And to that percentage of most sales are under $50,000. There are very few that are at that multi-million-dollar level, but they are all in post-war and contemporary art. My comment to you all is, as you look on sites, first of all, buy what you like. I mean, it is an asset class. We'll talk more about that, but you should buy what you like. That should be an equal measure opportunity. Let's go on to the next slide. The evolution of the market. Do you want to expand it all on online sales? Okay.
Actually, Todd, I have a quick question. So you mentioned, Ed, you mentioned what was sort of in the fine art world, what people are collecting, but in collectibles, what are people focusing on right now? What is increased? So.
Well, in terms of increase in value, we've seen it across all 40 some different categories that we're involved in. However, I think your question more is where we're seeing an infusion of new people. Heritage has introduced a number of new categories that have specifically targeted our most interest to millennials and younger generations. We've launched categories now into Pokemon gaming cards, VHS tapes, Magic cards, gaming cartridges, gaming systems, items that we're selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars for these original gaming that are in the original packages. We started at $1. You know, it's literally, it's one of the great things about the auction marketplace is that it is the best indicator of fair market value. We see these situations happen all the time where somebody passes on an item in a private sale for $50,000 and it goes to auction and it sells for $200,000. Well, that works the other way around too, of course. But so some of our largest category at Heritage is actually in rare coins and precious metals, certainly by volume. Although comics and now sports, you may have seen recently, Heritage set a world record, $12.6 million for a Mickey Mantle rookie card. Again, bidding started at $1. This particular card was one that was known to be the finest known and had been considered finest known for 30 some years. But it's not a unique item. It was driven by quality in that case. Comic books, we've sold numerous comic book for over $1 million each, original comic, which has morphed into comic art. These people that design these comic book characters and were incredibly talented artists in their own right. And that sort of transcends the actual comic book now that we're using their original comic art that they've done. That's also seen a huge increase in popularity. Sports collectibles in general, memorabilia. We sold Jackie Robinson's rookie year uniform with the Brooklyn Dodgers. So I think that was a couple of years ago. And I believe it sold for somewhere between $2 and $3 million. And we're seeing these from these younger generations now that are coming in and collecting in a very meaningful way. So collectible items are very different than art items. It's really two very different beasts. In collectibles, a huge part in most of those categories is the condition of the item. So in rare coins and in comic books and sports cards, condition they grade these on a scale, much like diamonds are graded on a scale according to their color clarity, can make a huge difference in the value of the stone. Same thing applies to collectible items. And we use, for the most part, we use independent third-party authenticators and guarantors on the quality and on the genuineness of these items. So it takes the auction house and the dealer out of it. And the difference between 1 point on those scales can make a huge difference in the value of these collectibles. So all the more reason and importance to educate yourself, which is something that we're very big on at Heritage in terms of education and putting as much data and information up on our website about an item that anybody could possibly want to make an educated bid.
Let me jump in for fill in a couple of nooks and crannies. of these two talents. In 2020 with COVID, the market, the auction houses, other than my newfound friends to the left, the major auction houses were slow on the web. And they basically for 6 months shut down and did a mad scramble to try to conduct online auctions. And one of the name brands, who I shall not, they were sufficiently inexpert at it. They're doing an online auction and everything crashed. And some friends of mine bought art at prices they could not believe because all the bidding had stopped. So that was kind of interesting. So all the auction houses adjusted, but Heritage is out front in their web execution. That's one thing. Second, current times. You got scary inflation. We heard about it for most of today. Bond and stock markets are unruly, to say the least. Art is uncorrelated, has a 0.15 correlation to interest rates and equities. So it really is a safe haven. Now, 85% of wealth advisors recommend, including today, that is, a portion of the portfolio into long art. Now, McKinsey, here's another thing you talk about a growth market. McKinsey estimates that most individual portfolios have about 2% of their assets in alternatives. In the next 3 years, they expect that to grow to 5%. That means an increase of $1.3 trillion will be flowing into alternatives, some of which clearly will be in art. So interesting times to be in the space. So you got to buy stock in Heritage.
And so I think that sort of segues too is like how the market is evolving, right? You know, and I've seen that, you know, obviously online sales have been a huge push and a huge change. And in my line of work, you know, obviously connections with all the auction houses, I can by far say, feel comfortable saying that Heritage was ready for the pandemic and ready to you had everything you needed to handle the online bidding, continue on with your auctions.
Very true. And I'm looking at my slide up there, and there's this thing called Modo. And I just thought I'd explain what it is, because we're always thinking about what we could do new, how the marketplace is changing. So we started a program called Make Offer to Owner. So at HA.com, you're going to have 30, 35 years worth of archives. Everything we've ever offered and sold is at HA.com. Well, say you missed a sale recently, or say you're a upgrading collector, you can pick out an item on our site, make offer to owner, and we will negotiate a deal. That's our way of doing private sales right now. And I think all auction houses should be thinking about ways of changing how they do business or adding to their portfolio of options. Shall we go to the next slide? Collectors and high net worth. The spending by high net worth collectors increased substantially over the pandemic. 1/3 of high net worth collectors had spent over $1 billion on art and antiques. I think collectors are seeing these paintings, art, collectibles as an asset class, and it is increasing their expenditures. 11% of collector spending was on digital art. This is, again, a global analysis. We are watching very closely digital art, NFTs, things like that. When I say we're watching very closely, we're not sure about it. I think that like the blue chip art that everybody knows, and the people with a lot of money that are buying the biggest, you know, multi-million-dollar paintings, there is a younger crowd that's getting speculative, and they have spent on the Beeples lot that sold for $69 million. It was 5,000, his first 5,000 digital images. and we'll see what happens with all of that. I think it's fascinating for us. Generation,
And let me weigh in on that.
Please.
NFTs, having looked hard at that market, here's an interesting statistics. There are 950,000 NFT owners from nothing. Now, volatility has been intense. A couple of interesting other facts. What is the appeal of an NFT? It's fascinating. 67% of those sampled would say, well, they like the art. It's more modern. Clearly, it's a younger cohort of buyers. Here's another one. I saw this in a secret study that was done by one of the big auction houses that I had the opportunity to look at. 39% of the buyers said it gave them social impact or a persona of being hip, and that's why they bought the NFT. Really interesting. And another 30% identified themselves as saying, well, it gives me status amongst my peers to say, I'm out there, I'm with it, I'm buying an NFT. Really interesting social dynamics, and quite different from the world of fine art.
So the millennials are out there spending, according to the global analysis, a good over 50% of the collecting is I think 25 to 45-ish age group, which is fun to see. They're getting involved in the business. Shall we go to the next slide? You know, we talk about collectors, and a lot of what we've talked about so far is buyers and the global dollars that they're spending and things like that. I thought since Andrea asked us to talk about the auction business, and it pertains to all auction houses, maybe Todd, you could talk about what used to be the 3Ds, how we get consignments, because everything is consigned in an auction house. Now there's a lot more Ds. Would you talk a little bit to that?
Well, I'll start by explaining just what the 3Ds, or what I used to go 4Ds, and that's what drives people. Collectors don't like to sell. Collectors are collectors. They like to acquire things. They don't necessarily like to sell anything, but they're oftentimes forced to for various reasons. In the auction world, we call it the 3, 4Ds, and that's death. It's an estate situation, divorce. So splitting of assets has to be done. The other one is what? Debt, I guess. Debt, they've got another, they need the funds for other investment opportunities or for other financial reasons. Another reason that I use, throwing a 4th D, and that's duplication. Collectors, especially we see in collectible fields where condition plays a big role. They may have acquired a rare sports card in a certain condition. Another one of higher condition comes along, so they sell that one in order to acquire the higher grade one. Same, we see that in coins, a lot of different collectible areas. If they collect autographs of, say, famous signers of the Declaration of Independence, everyone's looking for quality. That's a huge component to collecting. I'll let you talk about a couple of the new D.
I mean, there's desire. People want this property. There's downsizing. So it's expanding as people accept auctions as a really dependable and good way to sell your property as well as buy property. I neglected to acknowledge, I stole this presentation from the Director of Trust and Estates at Heritage Auctions, Michelle Castro. And she goes out and talks to a lot of advisors because they're handling estates or family wealth foundations and things like that. And if anybody out there watching wants us to do a presentation on the auction business, Michelle C at ha.com, or you can call one of us. We'd love to go out there. So just a couple more slides. You know, price point wise, Heritage kind of, we are in the $5,000 to $5 million range for fine arts. In the estate world, in Michelle's world for trust and estates, we will often handle an entire household. So when you go to ha.com, you may see a lot of items that are under 5,000 because we took a large collection and we were willing to process it efficiently with all of the art. But each house sort of has their best price point, and ours is slowly going up. We were delighted to sell this Norman Rockwell for 4.3 million relatively recently. Nostalgia plays a big part. Rockwell did all the covers for Saturday Night Evening Post and things like that. This is iconic, his iconic work, and you're gonna pay more if you're collecting the iconic work of any given artist. Let's go to the next slide. Anybody know Wayne Thiebaud? He did a lot of pastry drawings, paintings. He's a California artist. He just died at the age of 100. His market has increased enormously in the last 5-10 years. So we were delighted to offer this from an estate in California, and it sold for 3.2. Everybody knows Warhol. If you go to the next slide. Tomorrow we have a prints and multiple sale, and the catalog is alphabetical. I brought some extras for those of you who came today. They're in the back. But Warhols individually, they can sell 30,000 up to 120,000 individually at auction. Sometimes for prints, these are for multiples. It could be an edition of 300, it could be 50, it could be 500. In this case, this was a very pristine, complete portfolio of a series that Warhol did. It went for 1,875,000. So by getting the best condition and the full portfolio, you got individually, break it down, it's 187,500. We're always looking at condition, and we pass that on in a condition report on our site. You should always look at. Next slide, of course, iconic Chagall. Everybody knows Chagall. I'm putting these up here because a lot of these are safe investments because they're so well known. The more that people know about artists, the more likely they are to be a safe bet. Usually, you'll get back your investment. It's my opinion. I can't guarantee anything, but buying the iconic works of top artists is a good way to invest your cash. We talk a lot about art. Next slide. We do Tiffany lamps are always something that everybody knows about. They're gorgeous. We do 3 sales a year that include Tiffany. We have a silver sale. So decorative arts is a big part of most auction houses because of estates and because of the quality of the property. Next slide. I thought it would be interesting to point out, this is a Norman Rockwell. It sold for 1.7 million, but it's sold in a sports sale. We put it in there because of the subject matter and because we have such a large audience in multiple categories. We're getting those other collectors of other material in front of art. Next slide. Similarly, Frank Frazetta, this painting sold for 5.4 million in a comics sale. He is known to comics as an illustrator, and this is an oil, and his pieces are going very high, so we put it in front of that crowd. Of course, promoting it also to the fine arts crowd. Next slide. Yes, he was talking about cross-pollinating, which is absolutely something that we do. Interestingly, a couple of years ago, if you watched that dinosaur sale at, was it Christie's or Sotheby's? But it was in a modern contemporary art sale. It was a standalone, but it's fun. We're trying new things. We're a fun business. Next slide. Recently, we had a jewelry sale. What our jewelry expert found in a tennis bracelet, a beautiful little red stone. And she's like, I think that's a really good diamond. And she presented to the GIA. It's what, 1.21 carats, but the clarity and it's orange, not orangey, but the clarity and what GIA considers to be the best quality, the best rarity. We thought it would go for $1 million. It was in at 300,000 to 500,000. It went for 1.7 million. And these are the kind of surprises that really make the business fun and that make our consigners very, very happy. Handbags. Todd spoke briefly, next slide, to some of our new categories. What can you talk about the Super Mario Brothers?
No. This is gaming cartridge up here, one of the original prototype Mario Brothers games that ended up bringing $1.56 million, a staggering amount, still a record for any game to date. This is an area, collecting area that's become a big market share for Heritage. It's one of those areas that we're becoming very dominant in. It seems to have legs. People collect. In fact, let me take a moment to go back. Something that Alan said earlier, and something that my colleague here, Ed, just also mentioned about collecting and your good question about cross-marketing, cross-pollinating that we do. When I started out in this business, I didn't come from this sort of a background at all. I just assumed that the only people that collected were wealthy people. They had plenty of money. They bought things that were of interest to them. They had the capability to do so. So they collected things. But as I got older in life, I've met plenty of tremendously wealthy people that have no interest in collecting anything. They don't collect cars. They don't collect art. They don't collect rare wine. They collect businesses. They collect bank accounts. But conversely, in our business, I can't tell you how many people I've seen have with very limited financial capability nearly bankrupt themselves or their families because of their obsession with a certain collectible item. It might be comic books, could be coins. We see it across all sorts of different categories. And it's something that is some sort of a mutation that some of us have and understand about collecting and about connoisseurship, maintaining and curating pieces of history that we're passionate about. And it seems to be, like I said, something in the collector's mindset. It's a gene, it's a DNA code. I'm convinced of it. In collecting categories like coins, comic books, it seems to be a male dominant gene. Like literally, I'll bet you 99% of our clients in rare coins and precious metals and in comics seem to be male driven. In fine art, we don't see it nearly as much. It seems to be much more of a partnership between husband and wives and women collecting every bit as much as men do. But anyway, it's just fascinating things that we get to see from an auction house. I can't tell you how many times we've had people buy something. I forget what the item was that you said bought. Oh, the sports item. We set a world record for a rare coin, $9.4 million, $9.8 million. And the person who bought it, I was surprised to see, had never bought a rare coin before. He was recently in our auctions in jewelry, had bought a couple of nice jewelry pieces for his wife. And while he was at visiting Heritage, happened to see this coin, was fascinated by it. And sure enough, steps up and pays almost $10 million for a rare coin, despite having no previous interest in that. We see that more and more often. Again, people either understand collecting, and the people that do collect something, we find that they collect usually something else. It's very unusual for a guy who collects rare coins. He probably collects vintage timepieces and wrist watches. If it's a fine art person, it's very unusual if he doesn't collect maybe something like rare cars. It's very interesting how collectors collect in more than one category. Yeah, diversifying within a diversification, if you will.
Well, shockingly, the entire tech stack that we're putting together, the auction system, both work perfectly for any hard asset, including Todd's milieu stuff. So if he wanted to fractionalize some high value coin or some, amazingly enough, high value comic book and increase the opportunity for numbers of people to buy it, we would do that. And there would be no change in our execution. By the way, to build on what Todd and Ed were saying, here's an interesting, I'm going to ask the audience, I don't want you to be shy. Who do you think, it's kind of interesting, was the top selling fine art artist in 2021? Anybody want to make a guess? Don't be shy. Basquiat, close. Number 2, but no cigar. Anybody? I got a bid over here for Picasso. Do I have a second? In the aggregate. God, you guys are hot out there. Okay. Picasso, Ed, you can tell his expertise, was number 1. Basquiat 2, Warhol was 3. Here's a surprise because they haven't had the same currency lately, Monet. And then an artist I'm not so enthusiastic about, Richter. If you probably have better taste than me.
It's abstract. It's pretty hot. I like it. You know, the Monet's interesting. I think perhaps it's because that estate from Fort Worth went to New York and they had a room full of Monets. So it's going to be depending on what's available in some respects.
You guys might have some facts on this that I don't, but since we're looking at who can be a fractional buyer, here's some stuff that just blew me away about how broad the interest is in art. You know, I mean, it's really incredible. Banksy, you offered that. There's 11 million followers on Instagram for Banksy. Van Gogh, 3 million, and he had a recent thing with, you know, the Van Gogh film. 80,000 tickets in LA were sold in the first week. I mean, and this is a broad brush interest level. I could go on, but I don't want to bore you. Do you guys have any breadth or scale of those kind of insights? I'm curious in the spaces that you all cover. No? Marty, you have to introduce him to Ed. No, because Ed would like to help him sell some of them.
The doodles can be, he asked about how prolific Picasso is and how that affects value. And he was one of the most prolific. I think he made 5 pieces a day. He was so important for so many movements of different art scenes, Cubism to the Blue period to modernism, et cetera, et cetera. And he lived a long life and created a lot. You know, I spoke to buying, the more iconic, the more recognizable it is, affects the value. His work is very recognizable. So they're valuable, as Alan says, based on the dollar value, the top sold and by volume and dollar. So it depends on the artist, obviously, a great deal.
One trend too that I think we're going to see that we saw increased in the pandemic and will continue to increase is investing in art that has social impact and political impact. And I really want Heritage, I think Todd, you're going to talk about this, about the recent auction you had to raise funds for Ukraine, which I think we're going to continue to see trends like this in the power of art to help others as well. Oh yeah, yeah.
So real briefly, last year we were given the opportunity, well, let me digress for a moment. A couple of years ago, a Russian by the name of Dmitry Muratov was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his work in freedom of speech. He had a newspaper operating out of Moscow that was big on freedom of speech, free thought, which, as you might imagine, was not particularly popular in Moscow. But he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. When Russia invaded Ukraine and the war started, Dmitry Muratov announced that he would sell his Nobel Peace Prize and donate all of the money towards Ukrainian relief efforts, primarily directed more so on children refugee crisis that happened as a result. And Heritage was asked to present a proposal for how we would market and sell this item, and as were numerous other auction houses around the world. At one point, they were offered by one auction house a guarantee of $3 million. We discussed it and said we had sold previous Nobel Peace Prizes for one. Was it Francis Crick's, I believe? Francis Crick, inventor of one of the co-inventors of DNA. We sold his Nobel Peace Prize for about $2.7 million. This was going to be totally for charity. It had political ramifications. We weren't sure what this was going to sell for. We declined at guaranteeing the $3 million, but convinced him to still consign the item to us. We conducted the sale in New York, and the final bid was over $100 million. And setting numerous records for those types of categories, collecting categories, things like peace prizes and medals and numismatic items in general. This brought it, obviously it transcends whatever the collectible value of this item was and became an emotional thing. But it was a great event. Like I said, within 24 hours, the money was paid. And within 24 hours after that, UNICEF in Geneva, Switzerland, received the funds in full. It was really a great event and going towards a good cause. But I think that Andrea's question actually segues into something I'd love Ed to mention, and talking about how political trends, social trends impact the art world.
Sure. I don't know if anybody got the New York Times on Sunday. There's the art section they do once a year. It's somewhat seasonally placed because there is a season for the big auctions. What's going on is between like Me Too and equality and fairness and Black Lives Matter, there's an increase in the amount of attention given to female artists, to Black artists. And every other article is about that feature, and we're seeing these works come up for auction. And these are very talented people that were under-recognized for many years, and they're getting their due. So it's the trends of what becomes acceptable for auction. It has to be a certain value. There's got to be an audience for it, is allowing for more excellent female artists to come up, Black artists to come up. So it's a response to our society and helping these communities that deserve a lot of attention that has passed by them in the past.
Another trend that I would like everyone to weigh in on is, what we're hearing about every day on the news all day is inflation, and how do we think the art market is going to be impacted, or is it being impacted?
I think Alan can talk to this in a very effective way as well, but I'll start out. We've been very fortunate in this country that we really haven't seen any periods of super high inflation in over 40 years. It really wasn't 1979, 1980, 81 period. And so we don't have a lot to compare it with. However, during that time and during smaller inflationary periods, we've seen that impact collectibles in a very positive way. We've seen forcing prices to go up. Certainly in my category of rare coins and precious metals, there's almost a direct indexable sort of measure with inflation, where we're seeing the prices of gold and silver, other precious metals going up as a result of inflation. And so far, we're seeing this across really all of our collecting categories and in fine art. Whether it's directly related to inflation right now or not, it might be a little early to say for sure, but we believe it does. Anytime there is economic crises or economic trends that are going in all sorts of different directions. People are always looking for alternative investments, other safe havens, looking for hedges against inflation or other economic factors. And I think the collectibles over the years has simply become every month of every year, collectibles and fine art become more and more of a recognized, legitimate way, asset class and a way of investing.
Couldn't agree more. Here's some interesting hardcore statistics. Younger generations, which I was really shocked by this, 57% regard art as a safe haven. 50% regarded as a great inflation hedge. And then a very specific cohort, Gen Z collectors have 30% of their wealth in art, which gives you their sense of their risk aversion and skepticism about equities and traditional investment markets. So fascinating.
Yes.
Shall I start? I mean, size matters. I mean, you've got to be able to fit it in your home. You've got to transport it. But if you're that collector with that gene who loves a big abstract Joan Mitchell or, you know, a Francis Bacon, you know, you're going to buy it no matter its size. So I would say that's less a factor. It's more of a challenge for some collectors, but I think it's more about the specific artwork. That's my my thought. Alan?
Normally I would agree, but here I don't. The really large art pieces, and we've been exposed to them as a lender, how many people have the space to hang that picture? We have a very valuable sculpture that's 15 feet high. What the hell are you going to do with it? And yeah, that's right. So I actually think it does impact valuations as, and certainly we consider that when we're making a loan and how transportable it is. One thing that's not so obvious on the transport, just to digress a second, and these guys of course know much more about it. If you buy a piece of art, you want to be sure, particularly if it came from outside the US, that with your art piece gets to transportability, do you have a permanent export certificate? A lot of art gets moved around on temporary stuff, and then that somehow gets lost when it's about to be sold, and then you're screwed if you want to move it. Or it gets rescinded, and that's a problem. Or, and a piece of art I'm very much aware of, Italy reclaimed it and said, it wasn't supposed to leave here in the first place. It was just temporary to go to an exhibition, and we want it back, and it ain't leaving. That's a hardship for the collector.
There's a lot of restrictions in Brazil overall and things. Yeah. Yeah. I'll just briefly talk just a little bit about that because I want to get into some very important services that Heritage offers for collectors and investors too. But stay tuned. America is following suit with many of the other nations on anti-money laundering laws that will require similar disclosures like what you do when you take out a bank with a loan. It's know your customer, KYC, so that the actual purchase of the art will be revealed. You have to, and it's not public. It's all the goal is to have this sent to sort of a private government agency. But it's efforts to stop money laundering and things like that, and looting as well. Heritage, along with the other major auction houses, already has these procedures in place and has already been doing this. This is already implemented in the EU and UK, many other countries as well. So America is just kind of riding on that train now. And so there should be some more regulations about that. And forthcoming paper, actually, I'm writing for Heritage on that next month. So yeah.
Yeah, repeat the question is, do I think fractional art will become more popular? Yes. Will it be through NFTs? In our case, you got to be careful. And I'm going to get kicked here if I misspeak by our able counselor. Here's the tricky thing with art. You got to remember there's a copyright. And on an NFT, you have the right to use the art for personal display. You don't have the right to sell it, typically, because you're not buying the copyright protection. So in our case, we give every shareholder a high-res digital image that you can print it, as the tape said, put it on your screen or put it in the metaverse, whatever, but you can't sell it. On some pieces of art, we'll get special permission and have the copyright associated with the NFT, and then the NFT can be transportable and or sold more easily without tripping any wires. So yes is to the image, the use is proscribed.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you get the right to display it yourself. You don't get the right to license it to Target to make t-shirts off of, you know? Yeah. Oh yeah, actually, yeah. I don't know if we're running low on time. Yeah. But anyway, look up, Google Dune and copyright infringement NFT. Google that, and you will see textbook example of people spending millions of dollars and not understanding copyrights. But I was hoping we could wrap up with some additional services Heritage provides to collectors and investors.
Thank you, Andrea. And this is any auction house. Any big auction house provides a lot of services besides buying and selling art and collectibles. And as Andrea said, we have a Trust and Estates newsletter. She's going to write an article on money laundering, but there's about 9 articles in each newsletter. If any of the group wants to get the Heritage Auctions Trust and Estates newsletter, email Michelle C@ha.com, MICHELLEC@ha.com. And so she runs Trust and Estates, and she works with advisors, executors, finding solutions. Sometimes it's better to sell the property and split up the money among the heirs versus distributing it, where, a few years down the road, we find out that, Joe got the $400,000 painting and Sue got the $10,000 painting. So decisions have to be made by the lawyers and advisors out there, and she's involved in all of that. And we bring a lot of it to auction. Check it out, ha.com. Formal appraisal services. There are, the word appraisal can be used in many ways. We evaluate works every day, 1,000 inquiries practically a day among all of our categories. We will provide an opinion of value at auction, fair market value, secondary market. But if you need an insurance, a fair market value, an estate, a formal written estate appraisal, that's a service that we provide. You can look us up for that. And that's used often for taxes or, as I said, insurance. Corporate art services. There's a lot of Fortune 500 companies that collected art over the years. Many of them are selling, and you'll find it at auction. Some of them are still buying, and we provide help on that front. We work with museums, deaccessions. Sometimes they're looking for something for their collection, and we'll keep our eyes and ears out for our clients who have that type of work. and general art advising. I mean, I encourage all of you as you get involved in art or in auctions to get to know our specialists. We've got 130 specialists, and they've been in the business for years. I will say that half of the art specialists did work at Christie Sotheby's. They wanted to work for a growing new burgeoning auction house. But educate yourselves, look online, ask questions, come to a preview. We are delighted to talk to collectors, especially if you have that special gene. Yes, Alan asked about private sales. We do offer some opportunities if a person's doesn't want to take the auction route, want a certain price, and we know we've got potential buyers. It's relatively newer for Heritage, but we are certainly open to it.
Do we have any other questions? I saw someone raise their hand back there. I want to make sure. Oh, so our Gen Z, young millennials, younger generations, are they investing more in NFTs versus traditional art and collectibles investments? I mean, my opinion is it's still much higher in traditional collectibles and investments, and the NFT is a new thing. Alan, you had a quote about
One thing that's interesting about the NFT buyers, and maybe this reflects the younger generation, in the securities jargon for some of us old people, they're flippers. They love trading. So they will dart in and out of NFTs, which is pretty interesting. Okay, so they're flipping the art and keeping in some cases, keeping the digital image that they've copied. So that's one phenomenon that we didn't really talk about. And then on lower value art, that's where you're also seeing Gen Zers come in, and that's because they can't afford, without our fractionalization, the opportunity to buy higher end art in smaller amounts. We'll be able to sell, for example, to somebody, a $5,000 share of a major painting, which has not been available.